Quick Tip Monday. Enjoy. Hi, it's Terry Hartley with Rustic Barn Cards. Today we're going to talk about all things embossing. How to emboss. Also going to show you how you can emboss in any color. So let's get started. When you're embossing, you will need some embossing ink. I use Versamark. You will also need some embossing powder, and we sell several colors in our store. I'm going to start off with silver, and it comes in this little jar. I like to then pour it into a container, or sometimes I do leave it in a jar, but I still put it in a container, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. And then I use an embossing buddy, which is just filled with powder, and that kind of helps get the oil off your fingers, off what you're going to stamp. But unfortunately, we do not sell embossing buddies anymore. I do believe you can purchase other places, but you can use a dryer sheet. It does almost the same. And then I like to have a little paintbrush just in case you do have some embossing powder on your cardstock where you don't want it. You can then use that to brush it off. And of course, you're going to need the heat tool. Our heat tool has two settings. It has a low and a high. I always use it on the 2, the high, for heat embossing. Okay, so I'm going to bring in some cardstock, a label, and I'm going to take my embossing buddy, and it's just kind of full of powder, and I'm just going to wipe it across. But again, if you don't have that, you can take your dryer sheet and do the same thing. I just kind of make sure the oil off my fingers or any fingerprints, that type of thing. I'm going to bring in is removed, so that way the embossing powder will stick to the sentiment where we have the embossing ink and not where our oily fingers have been. So I'm going to take off the cap, and this is very sticky, so I would suggest you hold your ink pad, and I'm going to stamp Merry Christmas. So you want to ink it up good. You can kind of hear the ink. Make sure you can see that. Now I'm going to put it not in the middle, but a little bit lower on. I'm going to be adding some embellishments later. So I'm going to stamp straight down, and then I'm going to press lightly and firmly, but I'm going to hold this stamp on there just a little bit to make sure that I get all the ink on the cardstock. And now I'm going to bring in my silver embossing, and I have it in a container. I usually have a little flatter one, but I didn't seem to have an extra one, and I'm going so I just put it in this container. I'm going to use my spoon, and I'm just going to put the ink on my cardstock and then go ahead and flip it over, and it's good to kind of snap and make sure. And I think I did not on this one, because I'm going to use my little brush. I didn't flick I left my embossing powder on maybe just a little bit too long while I was talking. So I'm just going to use that to take some of the extra off, so no problem. And then I am going to bring in a clothespin. You could use anything. This is just to hold it so the heat from the embossing tool does not burn my hand. I do want to put the cap on my Versamark, and I want to go ahead and clean the Versamark ink off of my stamp. And then I am going to turn this on and let it warm up a little bit. And it's going to be kind of noisy. And you can kind of check, but I really would just probably wait maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds. But then, you know, it's nice and hot. And you do want to make sure that your embossing powder is far, far away, because you do not want embossing powder everywhere. Okay, so now I'm going to take this, and I'm hoping that you can see. So I'm going to, and I like to move. Now you can start on the, let's turn it off. Can you see the two R's and the top of the Y starting to change? And you'll want to move your heat tool, not just keep it in one place. And as soon as it changes, you'll want to stop. That way this is all embossed, and if you run your heat tool too long, then it kind of flattens it back out and kind of defeats the purpose. Okay, I'm going to lay that aside, and I'm going to bring in another label, and this time we are going to use a different embossing powder, and we're going to stamp in Merry Merlot. So I brought in my ink pad. I'm going to use clear embossing powder, and this time I have it in a container, but I'm also going to keep it, my embossing powder, I'm going to pour it back in the container, so I'm going to use a coffee filter. You could use a sheet of paper, different things. So this time I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead, and since I have an embossing buddy, I'm just going to go ahead and slide it across there. Bring in my Versamark. I'm going to show you this technique and another technique after this. So I'm going to bring in the same stamp, Merry Christmas, and I'm going to hang on to my Versamark, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have this stamp inked up well. But I don't want to do that because we want to, this time we want to add color. So now I am going to add my color. So I'm going to go ahead and ink this up, and it will not hurt the ink pad. So first you stamp in the Versamark, and then when you stamp on your ink pad, you are drawing the ink to the Versamark. And there we have the Merry Christmas in ink. So it does not hurt your pad. You stamp in the Versamark, and then the Versamark picks up the color from whatever ink pad that you're using. So let me put the lid back on here. Take the cap off my embossing. And then I'm just going to pour clear, and then again snap the back, and that's perfect. We don't have any embossing powder where we don't want it. I'm just going to lay that aside, and then I'm going to take my coffee filter and pour my ink back in the container. So you have a little bit of time because this Versamark ink is, it takes a while for it to dry. So again, I'm going to bring in this clip and turn on the heat tool. I let it warm up off camera. And I think you can see the RRY compared to the Christmas down below. So I'm going to move that around. And we have Merry Christmas. May not be able to see on the camera, but it's embossed. Maybe if I can turn it this way, you can see it will be shiny. And once your letters are shiny, they're embossed, and you'll want to stop and turn the heat tool off. So again, this is how you can emboss in any color. So you're going to stamp. You'll stamp your Versamark. Then you'll stamp whatever ink that you want. So this Versamark is drawing the ink from the ink pad onto your stamp, and then you'll stamp, add your clear embossing powder, and you want to use clear. That way, whatever color you're using will, of course, show through. And then you will heat, and you'll be able to have whatever sentiment you're using or whatever color you're using. So I think that is pretty cool. So what I'm going to do next is that I'm going to bring in a piece of black cardstock, and I'm going to use the dryer sheet. I'm just going to rub that across. And the stamp set that I'm using today is Celebration Tidings. So I used the Merry Christmas, and now I'm going to use Happy Haunting. If you like this video, please click like. I really appreciated it. And I'm glad you're here watching. So anytime you add a sentiment, you always want to put it in the middle of your block. So I'm going to hang on to my Versamark and ink it up well. And then I'm going to put this in the lower right-hand corner. Straight down. I'm going to press on it. I'm going to leave it there just a little bit to make sure all the Versamark ink gets into my cardstock. I'm going to hang on to the cardstock and go straight up. And now I'm going to bring in white embossing powder. So this is white embossing powder, but before I use that, I want to make sure I put that ink right back on the Versamark. You want to do that right away. So this is white embossing powder. I apologize, because I didn't have the other light on. So put the embossing powder on there, then I'm going to click it, take it off, and then you want to kind of snap. And now I'm ready to lay that aside. And for right now, I will put the embossing powder back in, but I'm just going to go ahead and set it in here and put that aside so I can emboss. And while I'm going to then add my clothespin while that's heating up. And again, starting to emboss. I hope you can see it on camera. And as soon as it gets shiny, then you have it embossed. And it's raised up. You may not be able to see it so much on camera, but it really gives it a pop with the white on the black. And you can do that by using white embossing powder. So again, use your Versamark, ink up your stamp, and after you stamp, add white embossing powder and your heat tool to emboss. Okay, I am going to use the Cobwebs 3D embossing folder that's in our mini catalog. So I'm going to put this right in here, and let me run this through the cut and emboss machine and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've run it through the cut and emboss, and our happy hunting. I like this embossing folder. I'm going to bring in cardstock, card base for pumpkin pie, and I can add this, and I'm ready to make a Halloween card. So today we have talked about how to emboss, talked about using Versamark embossing powder. I started out with silver, and we embossed Merry Christmas. Then we found out that you can use any color of ink. And how do you do that? Use your Versamark ink pad and ink up your stamp. Then ink it onto any color that you want. And then stamp, add your clear embossing powder, and then use your heat tool and emboss. And the third way is to how to emboss on black paper by stamping using your Versamark ink, stamping, and this time we're going to use clear embossing powder and of course our heat tool. I hope you have learned a few things about embossing. It really isn't that difficult. There's just several steps. Try it and you will find that it really adds to your cards. I appreciate you watching. If you haven't subscribed, I would love for you to click the subscribe button. And any comments you have about embossing, let me know. Thank you for watching and have a great day.